Hey guys, tonight we drift into something a little stranger than usual because you're not just falling asleep. You're tumbling softly into a mind shaped like a cathedral with spiraling towers, echoing chambers, and rooms that no one's opened in centuries. You're entering the world of Carl Jung. It's Switzerland in the late 1800s. You're a boy again, or a girl, or whatever your soul feels like tonight, and you're alone in a garden, staring at the roots of everything. There's a stone near the path. Not a fancy statue, not a marker, just a regular old mossy slab. But to Jung, this stone is sacred. Not because someone told him it was, but because he talks to it. No, really. He sits on it, and in his head he whispers, I am sitting on this stone. And then he switches. I am the stone on which he sits. He's 6, maybe 7, and already flirting with metaphysics like most kids flirt with puddles. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a small town called Kessville, nestled along the dark glimmer of Lake Constance. It's the 1876. Carl's father is a clergyman, dull, bookish, with the kind of faith that's more fossil than fire. His mother, a little more complicated, sometimes gentle, sometimes absent, sometimes found in the kitchen whispering to someone not quite there. Jung later wrote that his mother had 2 personalities, and maybe she did, or maybe, just maybe, he was learning early to see what others couldn't. School is brutal. You try to focus on the slate in front of you, but the teacher's words drip like cold water off a leaky roof. You don't belong here. You don't even want to belong here. You'd rather be outside, following beetles and building imaginary empires, or curled up in that damp, dark attic filled with old books, faded smells, and something else, something heavier. You climb the attic stairs slowly. Each step creaks with memory, and there, sitting silently in a glass case, is your great-grandfather. Dead, yes, embalmed, respected, revered, but still there, staring in profile like he's waiting to be consulted. Carl Jung's grandfather wasn't just a doctor. He was also reportedly a bit of a mystic, a man who talked about the soul like it had texture. Some historians argue whether Jung's fascination with dreams and symbols was inherited genetically or planted by these uncanny family relics. You don't ask why there's a preserved corpse upstairs. This is just your house. You accept it, like you accept the invisible people your mother chats with behind closed doors, or the way your father sighs into his sermons as if God himself forgot to show up that day. But outside is where the magic lives. You're back in the garden. You've been here all afternoon, watching ants carry food, listening to the wind threading through the trees, wondering, quite seriously, whether your body is real. It's not a childish daydream. It's a full philosophical inquiry. You feel split, like there's a Carl number 1 who does all the normal things, eats porridge, goes to school, smiles when told. And then there's Carl number 2, older, stranger, timeless, dressed in velvet robes and powdered wigs. He doesn't talk, but he knows things. Carl number 2 lives somewhere deep inside your ribs. He's not always awake, but when he is, you see things that make the hairs rise on your arms. You're not crazy, at least not in the diagnostic sense, but you are seeing the edges of the veil. Most people never notice. Historians still debate whether Carl Jung's early experiences were signs of budding schizophrenia or simply a rare, natural openness to the unconscious. Jung himself insisted he was sane, and perhaps saner than most. But even as a child, he knew there were layers to this world, and most people only skimmed the surface. You dream vividly. Not in flashes, but in entire symphonies of image and feeling. One night you see an underground cathedral, vast and cold. A golden throne sits alone under a shaft of light. It's made of flesh. On it, God defecates on a church roof above. Yes, that's the actual dream. You wake up sweating, shaking, and maybe smiling a little. And it's not rebellion, it's awe. You realize in that moment religion isn't just rules and hymns, it's something terrifying, elemental, real. And for the rest of your life, you'll try to prove it, not with doctrines, but with dreams, myths, and those tiny archetypal breadcrumbs left behind in every culture. For now, though, you're still just a boy, lanky, quiet, wandering the banks of a dark lake. You pick up smooth stones and pretend you're building cities. You stare into the water and imagine your reflection as someone else entirely, someone from a past life. You're still in the garden, but something's shifted. The breeze feels weightier, the leaves look like they're listening, and you're sitting on that same familiar stone, the one you've always called yours. But now, you're not just a child pretending. You're something higher. You're God. And no, seriously, don't panic. It's not blasphemy. Not exactly. You're 6 years old, and you don't think you're God. You feel it, like your bones have always known. You sit quietly, hands on your knees, head tilted slightly upward. In your mind, you become the earth. You feel trees as your fingers, clouds as the thoughts drifting lazily across your brow. You're not above it all. You are it. And then just like that, it turns. There's a strange, soft guilt that creeps in from nowhere. You suddenly remember your father's sermons, the stern frown of your religious instructors. You're not supposed to think things like this. You're not supposed to imagine yourself divine. God is elsewhere. Some white-bearded man in the clouds, not a boy in muddy boots with pine needles stuck to his collar. This is the moment Jung later described as his first conscious sin. And oddly, it's not because of anything he did, but because of a thought, a vision. He imagines the Basel Cathedral, massive, glorious, a kind of cosmic anchor in his childhood world. Its tower pierces the sky like it's trying to tickle heaven itself. And then the image, God is sitting on a golden throne, calm, colossal. And then, oh no, he lets out an enormous, divine bowel movement directly onto the cathedral. Yep, that's the dream. Go ahead, snort quietly into your pillow. Even Jung later admitted the image haunted him with both horror and amusement, a divine act of desecration. And yet, it didn't feel wrong. It felt true in some uncomfortable mythic way. And he didn't tell anyone, of course not. What kind of child walks up to his minister father and says, "Hey, so last night God pooped on a church?" You keep those thoughts buried deep. You fold them into little psychic boxes and pretend they were never yours. But they grow quietly. And here's the wild thing. Historians still argue whether this vision was a product of religious trauma, some early onset spiritual awakening, or a mix of both. But Jung himself believed it was a kind of initiation. That thought, as disturbing as it was, cracked open his world. It gave him a taste of the symbolic, of the sacred and the profane, all mashed into one dizzying image. Back in school, you're failing math, not because you're stupid, but because you're busy solving different equations. Why are you here? Why do people lie so easily? Why do dreams feel more real than daylight? Your teachers don't get it. They call you lazy, distracted. You overhear one of them whispering that you'll never amount to much, that you might have a nervous constitution. You don't know what that means, but it sounds contagious. So you lean further into your inner world. You read endlessly, not just fiction or fairy tales, but alchemy, ancient myths, philosophical scraps, the stuff most kids would have found unbearable. You read until your eyes sting. You doodle spirals in the margins. You start to see patterns in everything, from the way leaves fall to how your dreams echo the old legends. Sometimes you feel like you're splitting in half. There's the boy they see and the boy you see. Remember Carl number 2? He's back and stronger. Carl number 2 stands in the corner of your dreams like an old nobleman. He doesn't speak, he watches, approves, judges. He's not a guide, he's a reminder that there's more to you than your name and face and school records. And you're starting to believe him. You still love the garden, the silence, the weight of the air just before rain. But now, when you sit on the stone, you feel watched, not by people, but by something older, a presence. Call it God, call it psyche, call it hallucination. Whatever it is, it doesn't go away. You develop a secret habit when no one's around. You talk to yourself, not out loud, not quite. It's like part of you is narrating and another part is listening. You later find out this is a very young thing to do. He once said the greatest conversations he ever had were with his own soul. At one point, while everyone else is worried about exams and dinner and chores, you're wrestling with the nature of opposites. Yes, opposites. Like good and evil, God and Satan, conscious and unconscious. You wonder, are these actually separate, or are they two sides of one big cosmic coin? You're 9, and when your mother sees you staring at the sky, unmoving for over an hour, she gently puts a blanket over your shoulders and tells your father, he's just thinking, yes, but also seeing. There's a family story, kind of a quirky fringe detail, that Jung was once so absorbed in a dream state while standing in a field that he didn't notice a snake curling right next to him until it was gone. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe he was already slipping into that special mental bandwidth that most people only touch for a second and then forget. Back inside, you study a stone from the garden. It's small, gray, a little chipped, but when you close your eyes, it feels ancient, sacred. This isn't imagination, it's recognition. Some part of you remembers the stone, and you don't know what to do with that. You're still just a boy, still expected to say your prayers, finish your homework, grow up into something respectable. But something's brewing, not a breakdown, not yet, but a buildup, a psychic pressure, a call. And you know, without being told, that if you answer it, you might never be the same. The attic is cold and the light from the lone window slices the room into dusty triangles. You shouldn't be here, not because it's forbidden, but because no one else dares to linger. Yet you return, over and over, like someone visiting a shrine. The walls are lined with old books, cracked leather spines with gold lettering so faded it feels like they're whispering instead of speaking. You run your fingers along them and one practically hums under your touch. There's something in these pages, something old, something buried. Your great-grandfather's journals? Maybe? Or maybe they're just medical textbooks, but they feel heavier than that, spiritually heavier. And then there's the case, the glass cabinet that holds the dead man. He's your great-grandfather, yes, also named Carl Jung, a physician, a scholar, a towering figure in family lore. The way your relatives talk about him, you'd think he was half saint, half wizard. He died long before you were born, but that doesn't stop you from feeling like he's watching. He's propped upright, embalmed with eerie precision, his skin waxy, suit neat, hands folded politely. He looks like he might ask you to recite Latin at any moment. You don't scream, you don't cry, you just stare, trying to sense if any part of him is still in there. Historians debate whether this macabre display was something the young Jung actually saw or a constructed memory born out of family myth. But you believe it. Of course you do, because the moment is so vivid. You standing there, breath-catching, his dead eyes looking just past you, or maybe straight through. The attic smells like mothballs, mildew, and something older, like the breath of ancient wood. This is where you begin to think of time as something circular, not linear, not marching forward like a school teacher's chalk, but coiled, folding in on itself. You descend the stairs slowly, feeling older than you were 10 minutes ago. At dinner that night, someone says grace. You mouth the words, but your mind's elsewhere. Back upstairs with the dead man. You wonder if souls can linger in places, if ancestors can lean over your shoulder without ever making a sound. It's around this time that you begin fainting. It doesn't happen often at first, just every now and then when school becomes too loud, too bright, too absurd. You'll be reciting something meaningless at the blackboard when a hot wave of dizziness overtakes you, and you crumple. The teachers are concerned, your parents embarrassed. The doctor, he says you're nervous, a fragile type. You hear the word hysteria thrown around, and it makes you want to scream, but you don't. You just nod and retreat deeper into your internal world. Here's the odd detail no one talks about enough. After one of these fainting spells, you realize that you like the feeling right before it happens. That eerie, weightless moment where everything goes soft and distant, and it's like stepping between dimensions, a slow motion fall through cotton. You start to wonder if you're doing it on purpose. Not consciously, not entirely, but maybe your body is trying to pull you away from the outer world and back into the inner one, where things make more sense, where symbols matter more than numbers, where time slows and the dead can speak. You begin feigning illness to stay home, not to rest, but to read. You're elbow deep in obscure texts, alchemical diagrams, church manuscripts, pagan myths. You study like someone preparing for a test the world doesn't know exists. You're not trying to pass, just trying to understand. And somehow, despite your growing strangeness, you manage to scrape through school. Barely. One day, while your classmates play ball outside, you find yourself sitting alone by the river. It's ice cold, the kind of sharp water that snaps your senses awake. And you think, what if I just stepped in? Not to die, not quite, but to be purified, reborn. You take off your shoes, step into the current. It's so cold it burns. You stand there until your feet go numb, until the ache reaches your knees, until the world feels stripped bare. This becomes a habit, a ritual. And later, when you're much older and deep into the study of psychology, you'll understand it for what it was. An early attempt at initiation, a self-induced baptism into the mystery of the unconscious. You're not suicidal, let's be clear. But you are reaching for something bigger, a pattern, a truth, a way to explain why your dreams seem to predict illness before it happens, why your drawings look like ancient symbols you've never studied, why you sometimes wake up weeping from a vision that feels more real than your waking life. By the time you're ready for university, something hardens in you, a quiet resolve. You're done pretending to be normal. You choose medicine, not because you want to be a doctor, but because it gives you access to the mind, to the sick, to those who see what others deny. You board a train, backpack heavy with books, and that strange gray stone from your garden tucked quietly into a pocket. You don't tell anyone you brought it, but you plan to keep it close. Historians often point out how strange it is that Jung chose psychiatry at a time when it was seen as a dead sin, a backwater specialty. But to you, it's a frontier, a map to the invisible lands inside the human soul. And besides, no one ever got to know their shadows by studying healthy people. You don't say goodbye to the attic or the corpse or the old books, but you feel them like a chorus just out of view. They're not finished with you. You're seated at the edge of a hospital bed. The air smells like carbolic acid, boiled linen, and something deeper. Grief, maybe, or the ghosts of thought left unsaid. Around you, men and women with far-off eyes, blank expressions, twitching fingers. The asylum is quiet now, but you know that's temporary. Night brings sounds, not screams exactly, but leaks. The human psyche leaking out of the seams. You're a young intern in Zurich, still technically a medical student, but This isn't textbook material. This is raw psyche, unfiltered. Your colleagues call the patients lunatics. You don't. You call them mysteries, broken poems, labyrinths waiting for a map. One girl hasn't spoken in days. She just sits, hands curled like nesting birds, eyes locked to the corner of the ceiling. You crouch beside her. You don't ask questions. You tell a story. Something about a dream you had. 2 moons and a staircase with no top. She looks at you finally and whispers, "Yes." It's the only word she says for a week. This is your first real glimpse into the unconscious, the vast, dark sea beneath the waking mind. Freud had already started writing about it. You'd read him. You respected the boldness, the audacity of it all, but you weren't sold yet. His was a one-path theory: childhood trauma, sexual drives, repression. You could feel the weight of it, but also its limits. The human mind, to you, was not a machine clogged with mother fixations. It was a cathedral with hidden doors, spiral staircases, trap doors in the altar. You start keeping a notebook, not for diagnoses, for symbols, dreams, odd phrases you hear. You draw circles a lot, and snakes, and figures with masks. Your classmates think you're eccentric. Your instructors think you're talented but esoteric. You don't correct them. You let them think what they want. You're busy observing. One evening, while walking the asylum gardens alone, you pause near the trees and feel something watching you. Not a person, not even an animal, just presence, like the air itself is remembering something. You stand perfectly still, and then another one of those fainting spells, only this time you will it. You lean into the veil, and just before you black out, you hear yourself think, "This is what truth feels like." You're admitted officially as an assistant to Eugen Bleuler, head of the Berkeley Psychiatric Hospital and a quiet genius in his own right. Bleuler coined the term schizophrenia, and while the rest of the world still lumped all madness together under dementia praecox, Bleuler saw nuance, complexity. You respect him immediately. But here's the twist. Bleuler respects you, too. He watches how you listen to patients, how you diagram their ramblings into meaningful patterns. He once catches you mapping a woman's dream onto a medieval mandala and says nothing, just nods. You think, finally, someone sees the method in the madness. You begin experimenting with word association tests. You say a word, your patient says the first thing that comes to mind. Simple, right? Except you measure the delay. You note when the hands tremble, when the voice catches. You discover that some words strike deep, that they open trap doors, that trauma has fingerprints. This is the beginning of your complex theory. The idea that certain emotional clusters, complexes, shape behavior from behind the curtain. That people aren't just reacting to the present, but to echoes, shadows, memories they don't even know are speaking. Historians mark this as your first real contribution to psychology. But you don't care about footnotes. You care about unlocking the hidden codes in the human mind. You try your technique on yourself. Of course you do. You say, "Mother." Your pulse jumps. You say, "Failure." Your hand twitches. You say, "God." And something cold slides down your spine like a whispered dare. Still, you feel isolated. Most of your peers are dissecting brains. You're mapping dream architecture. They want clarity. You chase paradox. One night, after a long shift, you light a candle and read Goethe's Faust until dawn. You underline the lines about knowledge and temptation. You start to suspect that every patient you've met is a distorted reflection of yourself, and vice versa. Here's the fringe moment, the part you don't even write down. You dream of a tower, a spiral staircase made of bone. You ascend. Each step hums under your foot. At the top, a window. Through it, you see your face, but older, wiser. a scar under one eye, and then, just as you reach for the handle, you wake. You tell no one. Around this time, Freud reaches out, or rather, you write to him, and he answers. Your letters are curious, respectful. His are grand, affirming. He calls you his crown prince, says your work on complexes aligns with his theories. You're thrilled. At last, an ally, maybe even a mentor. You begin corresponding constantly, debating dreams, swapping cases. Freud invites you to Vienna. You go. The meeting is legendary. You talk for 13 hours straight, no breaks, just a mental tennis match of the highest order. Ideas flying, gestures animated, cigars glowing in the dark. It's exhilarating. But you also notice something. Freud flinches at certain ideas, especially when you start mentioning mythology, religion, the numinous. He calls it mysticism. You call it truth-seeking. Still, the friendship holds for now. You return to Zurich feeling galvanized. You've seen the heart of the movement, psychoanalysis. You're part of something, but you also know you're going to diverge. Sooner or later, you get married. Her name is Emma. She's calm, composed, and rich enough that you can quit the hospital and pursue private practice. You love her, and confusingly, not just her. But more on that later. You build your office with a small waiting room, a carpet that muffles footsteps, and a side drawer full of little carved totems and stones. You don't call them magical, but you do touch one before every session. At night, you walk alone by the lake, watching your reflection stretch out in the ripples like a long shadow with your face. You're just beginning. You feel it in your bones. The unconscious isn't a swamp. It's a cosmos. And you're about to launch yourself into its darkest stars. You sit by the fire with Freud again, this time in Zurich. The room is dim, shadowy, and smells faintly of tobacco and wet wool. It's been years since that first marathon conversation in Vienna, but the rhythm between you still pulses like a private code. Two minds circling a flame. You talk of dreams, hysteria, father figures, and phallic symbols, but you're starting to notice something different this time. Your pulse doesn't rise the way it used to. The awe has thinned, because here's the truth. Freud is becoming a fortress, closed, tall, and unyielding. He talks in absolutes. Libido is the universal key. Oedipus, the universal lock. Every symbol points back to the same primal urges. But you feel something else, lurking beneath. Something older, wilder, beyond the bedroom, and deeper than childhood. Do you press gently? You mentioned ancient myths, mandalas, the archetype of the Great Mother. You ask Freud what he thinks of dreams that feel sacred rather than symptomatic. He stiffens. He says, "That is mysticism, Carl," as if the word itself could burn his tongue. One afternoon, in the middle of a debate, Freud suddenly collapses, not from illness, from you. You had said something about the possibility that his ideas might be projections of his own psyche, and he fainted, dropped like a puppet with cut strings. You caught him, startled. Later, you wonder, was that a neurotic moment or symbolic? Had you touched something too close, too dangerous? Historians still argue whether Freud's fainting spell was real or theatrical. You never accuse. But privately, it confirms what you've suspected. This friendship has limits. You write Psychology of the Unconscious, and it's your first real break from the Freudian path. You don't reject sexuality. You simply insist that it's not everything, that dreams can mean more than wish fulfillment, that symbols are autonomous, that the psyche is vast and self-organizing, not just a chaos of suppressed drives. Freud is not pleased. You send him a copy. He sends you a terse reply. The correspondence dries. The warmth becomes ice. And then comes the final rupture. Freud sends you a letter demanding that you publicly pledge loyalty to him and the core psychoanalytic doctrine. You don't, because you're not a disciple, you're a seeker. You resign from the Psychoanalytic Association quietly. It feels like the end of a marriage. No, an excommunication. You're alone again, but this time there's a strange relief in the solitude. Except the solitude doesn't stay quiet. The dreams start. Not the usual scattered fragments, but full sequences. Cinematic, terrifying, sacred. You dream of rivers of blood flooding across Europe, of frozen landscapes with bones peeking through the ice, of a sea of dead washing onto your doorstep. It's 1913, and you're not the only one dreaming darkness. You don't know it yet, but the world is inching toward World War I, and you're unconscious. It seems to know before the newspapers do. You begin slipping, not just into dreams, but into visions. You call it your confrontation with the unconscious. It lasts years. You step back from your professional duties. You avoid parties. You walk along Lake Zurich with your feet on the pavement, but your head in myth. Some nights, you wake sweating, the image of a red horse galloping through your chest. Other nights, you see figures in your office, glowing, not human. One man in particular appears again and again. Elijah, bearded, robed, a prophet. He speaks, riddles, and vanishes into shadow. You begin drawing what you see, painting, writing, not for others, for you. You create what becomes known as the Red Book. You don't show it to anyone. Bound in red leather, filled with pages of ornate calligraphy, watercolors, and dream monologues. It's part scripture, part therapy, part exorcism. In it, you document your inner descent, your own myth. Mainstream scholars years later will debate whether this period was a breakdown or a breakthrough, but you know the answer, it was both. A necessary collapse. A conscious decision to descend into the abyss and map what lay beneath. You write, I had to let myself be carried downward into the depths, and you mean it. During this time, you see figures you've never studied, gods from distant religions, creatures from ancient alchemy. You meet a wise old man, then a mysterious female god, Salome. She's blind, but sees more than you do. Together, they take you through inner cathedrals, caves, deserts. And no, you're not hallucinating, you're not mad. You're exploring the autonomous layer of the psyche, the collective unconscious, the place where personal experience meets ancestral memory. It's the break, the idea that flips the whole field upside down. Because Freud believed the unconscious was personal, you now believe it's universal. You call these recurring images and figures archetypes. They aren't invented, they're inherited. Humanity's shared dream language. Symbols that emerge across cultures, untouched by time. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the shadow, the self. You realize the human psyche isn't just wounded, it's mythic. And within everyone, there's a journey unfolding, process of becoming, of individuation. That's your word for it. The slow unification of the conscious and unconscious into a whole, integrated self. But integration isn't cozy, it's brutal. You learn that firsthand as you weather the storms of your own depths. You lose weight, you isolate, friends worry, your wife stays but watches with concern. You reassure her and yourself that you have to do this. You carve tiny stone figurines by the lakeside. You whisper to yourself. You sketch snakes that become circles, birds that become flames. You're trying to speak in the language of the unconscious, and you begin to feel it work. You emerge, not healed exactly, but anchored, like someone who swum to the bottom of the ocean and surfaced with seaweed in their teeth and a map in their hand. You return to work, but differently now. You don't just analyze, you guide. Because now you know life doesn't begin when we're born. It begins when we find ourselves. You wake one morning in Kuznak, your quiet lakefront home, and the sunlight slices across your desk just so, illuminating a pile of sketches, dried ink pens, and half-finished thoughts. It's been months since your confrontation with the unconscious began to subside, but it still clings to the edges of everything. Like a dream you mostly forget, but still makes your hands tremble when you see a certain shade of red. You don't look away from it anymore. You listen to it. You dialogue with it. You're learning slowly that the unconscious isn't your enemy, it's your twin. A feral, symbolic twin with a head full of riddles and rooted deeper than memory. By now, the war has begun, 1914. You hear the gunshots only in the papers, but you'd seen them coming in your dreams. Oceans of blood, crumbling towers, a collective madness, rising like fog. It doesn't surprise you, not anymore. The psyche is not just individual, you've said. It's historical, tribal, even planetary. In all of Europe, it's lost in shadow. Your work turns inward again, but this time with purpose. You're developing something more refined, more structured, a kind of psychological model, not just for breakdown, but for transformation. The mythic journey of the self, mapped out in archetypes and opposites. You begin to lecture again, timidly at first. Some colleagues whisper that you went mad. Others say you became a mystic. You respond by explaining the shadow. It's your term for the parts of us we bury, shame, fear, rage, guilt. But you say it calmly, with that same glint in your eye. You don't banish the shadow. You tell your students, you integrate it. It becomes a cornerstone of your psychology, not to conquer darkness, but to know it, to greet it at the door, to invite it in and listen to what it has to say. Your clients begin to change. It's not just neurotics and hysterics now. It's people in search of meaning, lawyers in existential dread, artists plagued by symbols they can't explain, even priests who've lost their belief. You guide them through dreams the way a mythic guide leads heroes through the underworld. Your old peers scoff. They prefer rats and mazes and ink blots, but you're talking about the soul now. You introduce new terms, anima and animus, the feminine within every man, the masculine within every woman. You argue that the psyche is balanced on opposites and that true growth only comes when those opposites learn to dance, not fight. The alchemist, you claim, already knew this, and now scholars roll their eyes because, yes, you're reading medieval alchemy, seriously, Paracelsus, Zosimos. Jung the scientist has become Jung the mystic, or, in your view, Jung the realist, because the unconscious is symbolic. And if you ignore those symbols, you're only treating the shell of a person. Here's a detail scholars like to skip. You start building towers, literally. In Bollingen by Lake Zurich, you lay stone upon stone. No architect, no help, just your hands, the rhythm of stacking, the whisper of wind off the water. It's primal. Monastic, you call it your place of becoming. You live there for weeks at a time. No electricity, no phone. You carve Latin inscriptions into the walls. Called or not called, the God will be present. You mean the unconscious, of course. Always watching, always whispering. Historians still argue whether Bollingen was a sanctuary or a symptom. You don't answer, you just build. Back in Zurich, you lecture more. Your theories grow, so does your circle. Analysts begin gathering around you, as they once did around Freud. But this time, you're careful not to become a father figure. You don't want to be the next tyrant of theory. You tell them, don't become me, become you. One student asks what that means. You smile and say, it means go down into your darkness and come back with your own light. You say these things so gently, almost like bedtime fables, but there's steel beneath them because you did descend and you know what it costs. Let's pause here because there's a fringe moment you don't often talk about. You're sitting alone one night, thumbing through a volume of Gnostic texts. You come across a phrase, "Within you is a light that no man can extinguish." You put the book down and go outside. The lake is completely still, a silver ribbon under moonlight, and in the silence you hear something, not with your ears, but with that deeper faculty you no longer doubt. A voice, calm and ancient, says, "You are not the whole story, but you are part of it." You never forget that. Your psychology isn't just about treatment anymore. It's about wholeness, about the self, capital S, the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious together. You describe the self as a mandala, a circle that contains opposites, a symbol of integration. You begin using mandalas in therapy. Patients draw their dreams as circles, spirals, sometimes strange maps with no clear direction. But you know what you're seeing, the psyche in motion, trying to right itself, trying to become whole. By now, you've become known, even famous. Your name is spoken in the same breath as Freud's, but always with caveats. You're the mystic, the symbol hunter, the one who dared talk about God in the age of psychoanalysis. And still, you grounded. You keep carving stone. You still collect dreams. You still wake sometimes with a start, as if something ancient just brushed against your soul. The war rages on, then ends, then another begins. And again, your dreams predict it. Symbols of collapse, floods, towers crumbling. You don't interpret these as divine visions, just the unconscious reading the collective pulse. You once said, "The world hangs on a thin thread. That is the psyche of man." And you meant it. You're not just watching history unfold. You're watching it reflect the same inner battles you see in every patient, every dream, every fragile soul who walks through your door asking, "Who am I really?" And you keep answering not with definitions, but with maps. Because life doesn't begin with success or diagnosis or even healing. Life begins when you stop running, when you turn around and meet yourself face to face. You're older now. The beard has grayed. The skin beneath your eyes holds a permanent trace of sleepless nights and long dreams. But your voice? Still slow, deliberate, a mix of professor and prophet. You speak less now in lectures, more in interviews, as the world has finally caught up, or at least decided to catch a glimpse. It's the 1930S, and you sit for a photograph. Black and white, static. But inside, you're still moving, always moving. You've never stopped walking that interior path, never stopped asking, what is the self trying to become? More and more people are listening now, not just psychoanalysts or academics, but poets, priests, soldiers, teachers, people wounded by history, shaken by war, burned by ideology. They don't want techniques. They want meaning. And you reluctantly have become a kind of meaning merchant. But you're not a guru. You never were. You still hate being called a mystic, though you speak of dreams and spirits and the divine like a part of the furniture. You shrug off titles. When asked what you believe, you famously say, "I don't believe, I know." A cryptic phrase that both reassures and unsettles. Because here's the strange part. People want you to explain the world, but you keep pointing inward. They want predictions. You offer paradoxes. You tell them the shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living. And still, they come. They come with their recurring nightmares, their failed marriages, their existential despair. And you, sitting quietly, ask the same question every time. What does the dream want from you? Historians still argue whether your approach was scientific or spiritual. You never pick a side, because to you, the psyche isn't either slash or, it's both. It's a laboratory and cathedral, brain and soul. Let's take a strange, beautiful tangent, one of those quirky bits people either gloss over or misinterpret. It's 1938. You're approached by Wolfgang Pauli, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. He's having dreams he can't shake. Symbols of wheels within wheels, splitting atoms, feminine and masculine polarities. You listen, you interpret, and somehow it makes sense to both of you. That collaboration leads to something wild, the theory of synchronicity. The idea that meaningful coincidences, those eerie, timed, just right moments, aren't accidents. They're not causal. They're acausal, linked by meaning, not mechanics. The moment a woman tells you about a dream involving a golden scarab and a real scarab beetle taps on the window behind you, that becomes the cornerstone example. And yes, that really happened. You were there, stunned into silence. Synchronicity becomes your bridge between psychology and quantum physics, between psyche and matter. And suddenly, you're not just walking between Freud and myth, you're walking between Einstein and alchemy. You start writing again, this time, Answer to Job, a brutal, brave little book. You dare to psychoanalyze God. You say that the divine isn't just perfect, it's evolving, that the Old Testament God is shadowed and wrathful, and that humanity in suffering is mirroring that divine unconscious. Theologians gasp. Some call it heresy. Others quietly nod. You weren't trying to provoke. You were just following your method. Treat every symbol, every figure, every dream, no matter how secret, as if it had something true to say. The unconscious, after all, doesn't play favorites. It speaks through nightmares and miracles alike. Let's rewind for a second, because it's easy to forget the human side in all this theory. At home, you still drink tea at the same time every morning. You walk slowly. You hum when you think. Your wife, Emma, yes, still with you, stays your anchor, your balance. You had other relationships, sure, notably your bond with Tony Wolff, a former patient turned analyst turned something else entirely. Historians still debate that too. Love triangle, psychic sisterhood, a shared alchemical experiment. You never labeled it, because what mattered was the psychic transformation. And she helped you see your anima more clearly. She helped you know the feminine within. That's how your real-life relationships worked, not just emotionally, but archetypally. You were always mapping the inner world through the outer one, not to escape life, but to decode it. People often ask you, why does finding the self hurt so much? And you tell them, because it involves sacrifice. You sacrifice illusions, masks, comfort. You give up the ease of blaming others, the safety of smallness, to individuate, to become whole. You must confront the opposite within you. You must look at the shadow and say, you are me too. That's no small thing. That's a kind of death. You speak often now of death, not morbidly, peacefully. You've seen enough of life to know it bends in spirals, not lines. You once wrote that life is a short pause between two mysteries. You smile when you say that. Because you know the self is bigger than ego, bigger than biology. It stretches backward into ancestors and forward into symbols that haven't even formed yet. You're not trying to be remembered. You're trying to be real. Sometimes in your later years, you return to Bullingen Tower, you sit by the fire, maybe you read, maybe you carve another small stone, or maybe you just stare out at the lake, silver under moonlight, and wonder how much of you still lies beneath the water's surface. Like a dream not yet dreamt, life didn't get simpler, but it got clearer. You stopped needing certainty, you stopped fearing the dark. And in that surrender, something astonishing happened. You became whole. There's a certain quiet that only comes with age. And you wear it like a robe. Not heavy, not burdensome, just there. Like mist on the lake at dawn. You rise early now without alarms, as if your dreams themselves nudge you awake. The house in Kusnacht is quiet. The world outside buzzes with post-war recovery and the slow reconstruction of nations. But in your room, everything is still, as if time slows down for those who have truly listened to it. You walk past your bookshelves, stacks upon stacks, with notes and scribbles in the margins, and you know most people think these are your legacy. But no, what matters most isn't written down, it's lived. It's remembered, maybe not by scholars, but by those who walked out of your office and felt, for the first time, like their pain had a map. And what a strange, sacred map you've drawn over the years. A psyche made of layers, a collective unconscious that stores humanity's deepest stories, myths, dreams, fears, the whispering voices of the past. You say we're all carrying pieces of each other inside us, not just genetically, but symbolically. Symbolically, historians still argue whether your collective unconscious is science or poetry. You smile because to you the distinction never really mattered. Poetry, after all, was just science spoken in dream. Let's pull back for a moment, zoom out to the wider world. Psychology is changing again. Behaviorism rises like a machine. Data points, stimulus response models, rats pressing levers. Useful? Sure, but it makes the soul feel like a footnote. You watch from a distance. You don't fight them. You just keep going inward. Because you've always said the psyche is not a machine, it's an ecosystem. And to treat it like a box of wires is to miss its music. Here's a strange little scene people don't usually include in biographies. You once met an old patient at a train station, decades after her sessions. She recognized you instantly. You didn't remember her name, not exactly, but you remembered her dream. A lion made of glass shattering in slow motion. She asked you if it ever meant anything. You looked her in the eye and said it already did, because it stayed with you. Not every question has an answer. Sometimes just asking it changes you. By now, you are surrounded by new voices. Students, writers, seekers, theologians read your books in secret. Artists paint your symbols. Even CIA operatives flip through your essays on the shadow, hoping to understand how darkness hides in plain sight. Yes, really, even the intelligence agencies got curious. One journalist asks you if you consider yourself religious. You pause, then say, I don't need to believe, I experience. A maddening answer to anyone who wants categories, but it's the only honest one. You've stopped trying to define the divine. Now you just listen for it. In symbols, in silence, in synchronicities that make your spine tingle. New term is swirling in your writing now. Individuation, that long, slow, painful, ecstatic journey of becoming yourself. Not your ego, not your role, yourself. All of it. Shadow, anima, archetype, myth, memory. You say that life is a continual unfolding, like a spiral, not a line. People want clarity. You give them depth instead. And still, you make space for doubt. Doubt. You once wrote, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And yes, some found that too bleak, but you didn't mean it as a threat. You meant it as an invitation, because pain, in your view, isn't the enemy. Avoiding it is. You walk each day by the lake now, slower, but with purpose. There's a favorite bench where you sit and let the world pass. You notice the shapes of clouds, the way certain trees lean toward the water, the way your hands, still strong, still scarred, rest on your lap, like they're finally allowed to be still. You think often of your dreams. They've grown quieter in recent years, but they haven't stopped. You still keep your dream journal beside your bed. You still write them down, sometimes with sleepy scrawl, sometimes with urgent ink. Unrecurring image, a spiral staircase, worn wood, old stone walls, a soft light at the top. Sometimes you're climbing, sometimes descending. You never reach the end. But that's the point. And here's something lovely. People have started calling your work a mythology of the modern soul. You don't correct him. Myth, after all, isn't fiction. It's the language of the inner world. Let's toss in a final odd anecdote because you'd appreciate this one. In your last years, a young analyst asked what to do when a dream seems too overwhelming, too bizarre. You told him, ask it what it wants from you, then listen. And then you added, grinning, and if it says buy a goat, maybe it's time to move to the country. Humor even now, wry and quiet and strangely comforting. Because that's something people forget. You never claimed to be a prophet, just a man who listened, who dared to look inward when most were running outward. The world is changing again, faster now. Cars, radios, wars, televisions. But you remain anchored in the inner sea. Your life, if you squint at it sideways, looks like a myth. The young rebel, the dark descent, the symbolic rebirth, the tower by the lake, and through it all, a whisper. Find yourself, not by chasing, but by remembering. Because life doesn't start when you win, or when you achieve, or even when you're finally understood. Life begins when you stop being someone else and begin the slow, sacred work of being you. The house feels quieter now, not lonely, just quieter, like an old song humming in the walls. You hear it in the creak of the stairs, in the kettle's soft wheeze, in the way your books seem to breathe with the breeze through the window. You've always said outer silence is what lets the inner voice speak, and by now yours is fluent in that language. You're no longer lecturing, no more grand talks in packed halls, no more squinting through the lights of conference rooms. Now it's mostly letters, pages and pages of correspondence from students, philosophers, poets, soldiers, some humble, some frantic, some painfully lost. One writes, I don't know who I am anymore. You write back, good. That means you're close. You don't mean it cruelly. You mean it like an initiation. The self, as you've always said, isn't found in the mirror, it's found in the fire. There's a weight that settles in you now, but it's not fear. It's something deeper, the gravity of legacy, maybe, or the strange calm of someone who knows he won't be fully understood in his own time and is okay with that. Remember the tower, Bollingen, still there. You visit as often as your body allows. No phone, no electricity, no interruptions, just stone walls, thick air, and the lake. You've carved more inscriptions, Latin, Greek, alchemical symbols. One reads, called or uncalled, God is present. You once dreamed of a great winged being circling the tower, neither angel nor bird. You said it felt like a part of your own soul, watching, waiting. Historians still argue whether your spiritual visions were metaphor or madness, but to you, it was just the unconscious speaking its native tongue. Image, symbol, sensation. The soul doesn't text, it paints. Your health is fading now. You've had a few scares, heart strain, exhaustion. Doctors murmur about rest. You smile and tell them rest comes after. And still, the mind keeps working, not mechanically, organically. Thoughts bloom like mushrooms in the dark. You keep dreaming, keep journaling, keep being surprised. One morning, you wake from a dream of a giant tree growing through the earth, its branches piercing the sky. You don't try to interpret it. You just sit quietly with it. Let it grow. Because by now you've learned not every dream needs an answer. Some just need to be honored. Let's circle back to something less mystical for a moment, because your daily life still has its odd human quirks. You've developed a habit of mismatching your socks. Not on purpose, just with less concern. Symmetry is overrated, you joke. You also insist on eating outdoors, even in the cold. Something about the air makes the food taste more alive. and you've become increasingly fascinated by old myths, Norse sagas, Hindu cosmology, Native American visions, not to appropriate, but to notice how similar our symbols are, no matter where we're from. The hero, the trickster, the great mother, the wounded healer. Archetypes, you say, aren't just stories. They're psychic patterns, templates. They move through us, shaping how we fall in love, how we fight, how we dream of death. You once told a student, if you don't become conscious of the archetype you're living, it'll become your fate. And just like that, the myth steps off the page and into your living room. Sometimes, at night, you sit by the fire and reread your own words, not out of vanity but curiosity. You marvel at what poured out of you in younger years. Some passages you barely remember writing. Others feel like they were whispered to you. You don't think of your work as finished, just offered. You're amused by how people treat you now. Some still think you're dangerous. Others think you're a sage. A few think you're just plain wrong. You shrug. Because the truth is, you were never trying to be right. You were trying to be whole. You were trying to help others become whole too. Not perfect, just integrated. The ego wants to rise. The self wants to unite. There's a difference. Here's a tender moment most people miss. A young man comes to visit you in your final years, hoping for advice. He fidgets. He asks you how to find his purpose. You don't offer a formula. Instead, you hand him a blank piece of paper and say, draw your dreams for the next 3 nights. Then ask yourself which one scares you most. That's the one you follow. He nods slowly, the way people do when the truth hits and they wish it hadn't. Because finding yourself, as you've always warned, isn't safe. It's sacred. The world outside continues to march forward. New wars, new politics, new philosophies. People keep hoping for quick fixes, faster therapies, instant wisdom. But you've always said real healing moves like geology. It takes time and pressure. You're nearing the end now, but there's no panic in you. You once wrote that death is not an end, but a goal, like the setting sun, not darkness, but completion. And when someone asks if you're afraid of what comes next, you smile and say, no, I'm curious. You've taught thousands, you've healed hundreds, but maybe your greatest act wasn't building a theory. It was giving people permission to trust their own depths. Because, as you've said over and over, your visions will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. And now, as the fire crackles low and your pen rests beside the final page of your journal, that truth echoes gently in the walls. You're still listening. You don't hear your bones creak anymore. They just whisper. As if your body is catching up with the soul, shedding urgency like old skin. The mornings are slower now. You sit longer at the window, tracing the skies, changing moods with your eyes. The lake never looks the same 2 days in a row. Some days it's silver and glassy. Other times it broods like a forgotten god. You're fading gently into old age, but your mind still leaps like a child on certain days. New symbols still arrive in dreams, half-formed, flickering. You don't analyze them with the same urgency as before. You just welcome them. You're not solving the psyche anymore. You're walking alongside it. People still visit. Some come to learn. Some just want to say they met young. You shake hands. You offer tea. You listen. You never rush them. One young woman brings her dream of a tiger trapped in a library. You raise an eyebrow and say, well, I suppose that's what happens when instinct meets intellect. She laughs nervously, but you can tell it meant something. Historians still argue whether you were a healer or a mystic, but you, sitting there in that armchair, are no longer concerned with verdicts. Let them argue. You've done your work. Because the truth is, you were never trying to be a system. You were trying to be a mirror. And the best mirrors, as you've said, are the ones that don't flatter but reveal. Your health is fragile now. Some days you walk with a cane. Some days you don't walk at all. And yet your spirit still paces the corridors of dreams, tracing symbols, rearranging fragments. Let's pause a moment. Here's a strange, sweet detail. Your grandchildren sometimes ask you what you do all day. You smile and say, I sit and talk to the dead. And you mean it, not in a haunted house way, in a historian of the soul way. You reread alchemists, medieval mystics, Gnostics, forgotten poets. You believe they still speak, if we're quiet enough to listen. Even now, Bollingen Towers, your retreat, you've added a final inscription there in stone. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. You've spent a lifetime showing people they are not their trauma, not their parents, not their resume. They are myth made flesh, story in motion. And when people ask you if all this, the dreams, the shadows, the archetypes is real, you answer, more real than the morning news. Because what could be more real than the pattern behind the pattern? Let's not forget, you once studied the I Ching for months on end, not for prediction, but for perspective. You believed the unconscious could shape events as well as dreams, that inner and outer weren't so separate. Modern psychologists scoffed, but they couldn't explain your synchronicity events, those uncanny, impossibly timed coincidences that open doors in the mind. A patient dreams of a golden scarab. The next day, a beetle taps at your window. Coincidence? Maybe, but it cracks something open, and that's what matters. One of your final visitors is a nervous young analyst who's read everything you've ever written. He's trembling as he sits. You offer him chocolate and ask why he looks like he's about to confess a crime. He stammers, "What if I've misread you all along?" You chuckle. "Then you've read me correctly." And that's the gift, isn't it? You never wanted followers, you wanted explorers, people who'd take your tools, then throw away the toolbox and build something of their own. You were never the destination, just a signpost pointing inward. The war is over, Europe is rebuilding, modernity rushes in hungry for speed and certainty, but in your study, it's still. The walls lined with books, stones, feathers, and dreams. The fireplace glows. Here's a soft, almost invisible moment. You rest your hand on your dog's head one afternoon, just a gentle pat. You whisper something in German. The dog tilts its head, then settles. In that quiet gesture is everything you've learned. Connection, presence, attention. You think of your old patients sometimes. Not the breakthroughs, but the silent victories. The moment someone stopped crying. The moment they admitted they were angry. The moment they drew the monster and realized it had their face. You never saved them. You simply gave them the mirror and stepped back. You once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And now, as age wraps around you like a shawl, you know you've done that. Not perfectly, but authentically. And in your final lectures, you no longer talk of analysis. You talk of meaning, of integration, of the dream beyond the ego, the great spiral of becoming. Some take notes furiously, others just listen with wide eyes, and a few cry quietly, not because they're sad, but because they finally see themselves. It's strange how your voice is softer now, but your presence is stronger. You've become more myth than man in many circles. But you're still here, drinking tea, watching the lake, smiling at clouds shaped like dragons. No one really knows where the psyche ends and the soul begins. But you've wandered that boundary more than most. And as your breath grows thinner, your thoughts grow clearer, not sharper, just more whole. Because this was never about figuring things out. It was about remembering, and you remember everything now, not the facts, but the feelings. The first time you saw a patient's eyes light up with realization, the time you stood under a thunderstorm and felt your shadow stretch, The moment you stopped doing psychology and simply became it. The wind outside changes. You watch the trees move and you smile because this stillness, this breath, this gentle awareness is what you were searching for all along. It's early evening now, and the shadows stretch long across the wooden floor. You sit quietly in your chair, no papers in your lap, no books left open, just the hum of a life winding gently down. The tower at Ballingen holds still, as if exhaling with you. The lake is quiet. The air carries the crisp edge of late spring. Somewhere a bird sings, not in triumph, but in routine. It sings because it always has. You've become a watcher more than a thinker these days, not because the thoughts have stopped, but because you've learned they don't always need to be chased. Some truths you've found come when you stop looking. A nurse brings you tea. You thank her. You don't drink it. Your fingers rest lightly on the arm of the chair, tracing a faint groove in the wood worn down over years of reflection. You've held this space for countless souls, and now you're holding it for yourself. Let's talk just for a moment about what you never published. There are notebooks, scattered thoughts on God, images, dreamscapes of blood-red suns, musings about time not as a line but a spiral, pages full of strange, beautiful things you couldn't quite fit into the formal theories, not because they weren't real, but because they were too real, too raw for neat footnotes. You once wrote, "Life is a short pause between two mysteries." And now you're at that pause's soft edge. Historians still debate whether your red book, your deeply personal illustrated dream journal, should have ever seen the light of day. You had it locked away, unseen, for decades. Too strange, too vulnerable. And yet, it is perhaps your clearest mirror, a vivid descent into your own psyche, painted with all the terror and beauty you found there. No wonder you hesitated to share it. But vulnerability you knew was not weakness, it was invitation. You were never afraid of madness, only of a life unlived, of a soul untouched. Here's something you did almost daily in your final weeks. You'd sit outside, close your eyes, and just listen. Not to music, not to voices, to the rhythm underneath everything, the heartbeat of the world. And when people asked you what you were doing, you said, "I'm checking in with the old gods." You meant it only half jokingly. You've said many things over your lifetime, some of them praised, some condemned, but the one that seems to echo most often now, the one people write on their bedroom walls or tattoo on their ribs, is this: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Oh, how many lives that sentence has cracked open. It's not about control. You never promised that. You promised awareness, the kind that burns through illusion, that says, yes, this pain is mine, but so is this joy. You taught that we are not machines to be fixed. We are myths to be lived, complex, contradictory, terrifying, sacred. One afternoon, you whisper to your daughter, "The psyche is older than the body." She nods, though she doesn't quite understand. But you don't need her to. Understanding is overrated. Presence is enough. You sleep more now. Your dreams are quieter, simpler. No more gods or monsters. Just rivers, trees, faces you haven't seen in decades, smiling with soft recognition. Your hands, once so restless with pens and paints and margins full of symbols, now rest still. They've written enough. And finally, after a life of descent and ascent, of shadows and integration, of gods in disguise and monsters in mirrors, you breathe your last breath on a June day in 1961. But you are not afraid. You are curious. And so ends the journey, not with an answer, but with a question so deep it cradles the soul itself. And now, maybe that's the most Jungian thing of all. The fire's low, just embers now, breathing in a soft, fading rhythm. You feel your own body mimic it, slower, calmer, quieter. You've walked far tonight, through shadows and dreams, through symbols and stone towers, through the restless mind of a man who taught the world to look inward, bravely, vulnerably, completely. You don't need to remember every term, every dream interpretation, every alchemical metaphor. Just remember this: there is a self beneath all the selves, and it's been waiting patiently for you to stop running. Carl Jung didn't give answers, he gave questions. And better yet, he gave permission to explore, to feel, to fall apart and find something deeper waiting on the other side. So as you drift into sleep, let your thoughts go soft. Let them swirl like the lake outside Bollingen. No need to hold anything tightly. No need to interpret the dream before it arrives. Tonight, just rest. You are not broken. You are becoming. And becoming takes time. So breathe gently, sink into the quiet. The unconscious will meet you there. And somewhere on the other side of the dream, Jung is smiling, because life doesn't begin when everything is figured out. Life begins when you finally find yourself.